Diabetics often say that doing the work of a pancreas is a full-time job. Well, it definitely feels that way at times. But most of us also have more traditional jobs with bosses and customers and meetings and schedules, all of which are not necessarily inclined to accommodate our diabetes needs. And we have to find a way to balance it all. We all want to just get our jobs done, get paid, and stay alive while we're doing it. So today, Tracy and I are going to talk about diabetes at work. We'll share some of our own horror stories, dive into your rights as a diabetic employee, talk about how much info to share with your employer, and some practical tips for day-to-day life in the workplace as a T1D. Plus, we've got some stories from diabetics in our network, including shift workers and what it's like to be diabetic in the army. Tiny snack I know I can get away with. Good. Hello and welcome to Correction Dose, the podcast where we take on a new challenge every month to live our best lives with type 1 diabetes. I'm Kate, a writer and podcaster.
And I'm Tracy, a medical doctor and adventure athlete. We dive into science, stories, practical tips, and expert interviews, covering everything from carbs and exercise to fertility and tech.
Plus, we chat about our own highs and lows, our bruises, and those lovely 2 a.m. alarms, so we can learn to navigate diabetes like pros and hopefully help you do the same. Just a reminder that the content in this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice.
Kate, shall we dive right in?
Let's do it. Hi, Trace.
Hello, Kate. How are you doing today?
I am well. We're going to be talking about work today, and you've had some interesting jobs. You've been a doctor in a hospital. You've had a desk job for a healthcare business. You're a medic on Love Island and on I'm a Celebrity. So I want to hear all about all of those things. But first, I have a little questionnaire for you. So the first question, put yourself on a scale where 1 is diabetes comes first. I manage my diabetes exactly the same way at work as I do on my days off. And 10 is work comes first. I do as well as I can, but I never let diabetes impact my work. So where do you sit?
My first impulse was to say 5. I'm right balanced in the middle. But if I have to be honest with myself, often I'll put diabetes a little bit more on the sideline and focus on my work. Work will be prioritized. Besides, if I'm having a low where I can't do my work because diabetes is directly impacting my capacity to do so. But I'll generally prioritize work and try remain as competent as possible, and I will go above and beyond. But yeah, I don't know if that's the best thing. It's difficult to say. Where do you sit on that scale?
Honestly, right now, because I'm self-employed and I work at home, I'm probably like a 1 or a 2. I probably sit more than I should. But in general, I can manage my diabetes however I want. But have been in other jobs before where I must say I was probably more like a 6, maybe a 7.
Yeah, I'd say that's where I sit, 7, 8-ish.
Yeah, that seems fair. Okay, and here are some yes or no questions. Have you ever delayed treating a hypo because you were busy at work?
Yes.
I'm going to say yes as well.
Okay. Have you ever skipped insulin because work got busy?
Yes, definitely. Have you?
Yes.
Has work stress ever had a visible impact on your blood sugars?
100 million%. Absolute yes. Can confirm. And for you?
Ditto on that.
Has work ever impacted your ability to eat well, sleep well, or stay active?
Yes, and yes.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Yes. Oh, eating well with shift work, sleeping well with shift work. No, man. Oh, goodness. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, just being in an office in general. Food. There's often food in there that's not helpful. Have you ever turned off your CGM alarms at work?
Yes. And you?
Yep.
Have you ever had difficulty attending a diabetes appointment because of work?
Yes.
I have felt guilty about going to my diabetes appointments. And then I quickly learned, like, no, this is the one day of the year I get off as a diabetic. Like, I'm going to take it. It is a sick day. I'm not going to go to my appointment and then come to work afterwards. I'm out. I'll give you a doctor's letter. I'm going to go and like relax and take the day off.
Good for you.
Thanks.
Have you ever wanted to stay home sick because of diabetes and gone in anyway?
Yes. And you?
Yeah, I've definitely had like some sort of horrific overnight high or low or something and then dragged myself in.
Like a corpse.
Like a corpse. I have no idea if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Like, obviously, like, we're so badass and so resilient and good at our jobs and like, but also like, not the greatest for our health.
Yeah.
Have you ever had a hypo because of a work-related physical activity?
Yes. Chest compressions definitely got me into a hypo. And and you?
No. I've always had a desk job, so no.
I think this is our first no of the series of questions.
It is, yes. And also, I really hope if I ever have a diabetic EMT working on me that they have a snack nearby.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't worry, I had glucose sweets in my pockets. I just couldn't quite take my hands off the person's chest to eat them, but eventually help did arrive. So I just like sat at the side munching glucose sweets, like trying to be helpful and helping myself as well.
That is so stressful. I can't even imagine. Okay. And the last question, have you ever had a negative interaction with someone at work who didn't understand your diabetes management needs?
Not outwardly. I think because I'm quite guarded about it at work anyway, so I don't really let people cotton on to it that much. I think there's been like dismissive statements or people who might be like a little bit ignorant and not know any better, but not from like a malicious place. Maybe there's been interactions that have been not overwhelmingly positive, but I don't take them as like really negative. It just, you just let those things slide. And for you?
That's a good attitude. Only really one comes to mind. And I can tell you what it is maybe, because that's the last question. So once when I was in my old job, I was a travel agent and I used to work customer facing. So people used to come into the store and talk to us. And I had like the most enormous hypo where I was kind of like slumped over my desk, sweating profusely. I'd eaten like, somebody had a birthday and there was like loads of candy and I'd just like eaten all of it and then like couldn't get up from my desk again. And I was waiting for my blood sugar to come up. And the guy below the manager came and was like, "You can't sit here." And I was like, "Well, my blood sugar's really low and I can't move." And he was like, "Yeah, well, you can't sit here because if someone sees you, it's bad for the brand."
Oh my word.
And I said, "I'm sorry, I can't move." And he was like, "Well, you're going to have to. And then he just went away. And he didn't ask like if I was okay or like, so I had to like drag myself up a flight of spiral stairs to the upstairs. Literally like, to be fair, like it wasn't a good look for the brand, having one of your travel agents like basically dead.
Dying at the front desk.
Yeah, it's not a great look. But I do think he could have just been like,
"Are you okay? Can I help you?" Yeah, your medical emergency is really not a good vibe it's not giving. So can you please go upstairs and die somewhere else out of vision, please, Kate?
Yeah, so that was a bad one. I was like, I literally didn't know what to do. I was like, I physically can't do what you're asking me to do. It's also not a good look for the brand if I'm like leopard crawling away from my desk.
Like, elbowing your way like a slow slug. Just
Yeah.
so I think the most near-death experience I've had at work, so I was in the ward about to start like seeing all my patients, and then my sugar started going low, but I was like, I need to hurry because I need to start my job. And I started quickly eating like my lunch, and there was a little piece of butternut that I basically inhaled and nearly choked. I don't say this lightly. I nearly choked and died. So I'm like borderline hypoglycemic. This piece of butternut is trying to enter my like right lung, and I'm just like, like just trying not to die. And there was no one around in the ward at that time. And I was just like, this is how I die. And I was like, okay, just try to remain calm with this. Anyway, I'm here today, so I survived, but my eyes were streaming with water, and I just like looked around and been like, did anyone see me just survive? Because I'm a survivor today. And then carried on with my day. So I'd say that's the scariest experience I've had.
That's hilarious. I feel like they need to like put you up on the board with the other patients, like admitted with hypoglycemia and near choking in curtain 5 or whatever.
Patient discharged and sent to the ward to see her own patients.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Patient advised to chop butternut a little bit smaller in future.
Yes, or to chew food and not breathe it in.
Yeah. Patient shown diagram of mouth and nose and lungs to indicate where food ought to go.
Ought to go. Exactly.
So, in general, all of these questions that we're asking on my questionnaire, what kind of memories are they triggering? What kind of thoughts are they triggering about your experience as a working diabetic?
I think it's actually been quite insightful, because I almost didn't realize how much work and diabetes had a hand-to-hand relationship. Like, obviously you experience it day to day, but like reflecting on these questions, it kind of made me a bit sad in a way that I have put myself on the burner for work. And there's actually been a lot of guilt, like not wanting to take a sick day, just being sick, let alone also having diabetes, and then going like, I can't not show up at work because I'm going to let people down, and the wards are so busy, and other people are going to be compromised without me, being there. There's days where I've slept probably an hour in the night because of hypos and alarms going off and not being well, and then still waking up and not even for a second thinking, oh, maybe I should take a sick day. I think as a diabetic, you continue that, like, just keep the momentum going. Like, you've got this, don't worry. And only after like years and years have I reflected and gone, whoa, okay, I'm not well right now. I had a really bad night. My sugars are not stable. I actually need to sleep, and I need to take a sick day. It doesn't feel comfortable, but at least the idea is there to actually prioritize my health in certain situations, because I never wanted to use it as an excuse for not being able to perform my profession. And that's why I'd push through everything and anything to, like, I don't know, prove to myself, or I don't know who else proving it to, that diabetes is not going to get in the way. But it was getting in the way, but I was just like muscling through it.
Yeah, I think that's very relatable. I also have a sense of that, like, dissonance of, like, on the one hand, we absolutely can do everything. Like, you've worked as a shift doctor, as a diabetic. We had a diabetic prime minister in the UK. Last night, a diabetic won the French Open. We can do things, and I don't ever, like, firstly, I don't want, like, pity, and I don't want, like, everyone around me to have to accommodate me. And secondly, I want to achieve things, and I want to challenge myself and live my life. But I think on the other hand, like basically when I quit that job, that travel agent job, after being very miserable and very stressed, I quit and became self-employed. And I've had the opportunity to it's the first time in my life I've thought about my diabetes, first of all. That's when I sort of thought about the podcast and started like thinking, maybe I should actually pay attention to this instead of just kind of staying out of danger all the time. And I've kind of set up my whole life in a way that accommodates it, which is not to say I don't do other things or I don't, prioritize other things, but it's become part of my thinking when I kind of design my lifestyle. It impacts like, what time do I want to go to bed? What kind of lunch do I want to have? When am I going to exercise? Like, what time of day do I want to exercise? How I arrange my work. So I tend to, leave a little gap in the day somewhere where I can de-stress. Managing stress is a huge part of it as well. So I definitely think I've had the opportunity to realize how much your health can improve if your work does completely accommodate your diabetes. I'm not saying that it has to, but it does sort of reveal to me just how much of your routine and your lifestyle and everything to do with work can impact your diabetes if you let it. I think let's maybe try and make a list of what we think are like the biggest challenges of working as a diabetic. Stress is one that comes to mind because it's quite hard to quantify in your blood sugar and you can't really avoid it. You can manage it and cope with it. But unless you quit your job, sometimes stress is just part of the job. And I think a lot of the things I experienced at my old job are quite boring, but common workplace issues if you're an office worker of some kind, like being in meetings or with customers and not being able to respond to an alarm or suddenly eat something in the middle of that interaction or not comfortably. Working long hours, maybe eating bad food that's at work if there's often snacks and crisps and sweets in the office, or in the UK, drinks after work are a very big cultural thing, often without food. So leave the office and go for lots of drinks on a Friday or a Thursday, depending on where you work. That's not ideal. If you travel for work, it can be tricky managing your routine, injecting in the office or changing your sites in the office. And, where do you do that? When do you do that? Those are some of the big ones that come to mind. And then being sedentary, sitting at a desk all day, definitely not ideal. What else?
I think, and shift work. Just the disruption in like your circadian rhythm, if you're working nights and then you're working days and then you off 3 days, and we rely on routine so much for diabetes. Kate, you were chatting earlier about how insulin pumps, they also, closed loops, they're trying to recognize your patterns from day to day. But if you're doing shifts, you are all over the place. So it even makes it difficult for your technology to keep up and find a trend if your life is not following a particular trend. And that shift work often comes with sleep deprivation, which also just really messes everything up quite nicely.
Yeah, and then also time off work. So whether it's for appointments, which are very difficult to schedule in the UK, you normally just get a letter telling you when it is. And good luck to you if you want to change it, because, it'll be like a year in advance sometimes that you get the letter. Or sometimes it'll be like the day before and you just don't know.
Wow.
And then secondly, you also need to then potentially schedule time off for any kind of emergency. So if you do find yourself DKA, you do find yourself in the hospital with an infection and they want to keep an eye on you, or any kind of diabetes related issue, maybe treatment for a complication, if you have, laser for retinopathy or anything, got to find the time off for that as well. And, your employer should be reasonable about it, but it can be a bit of a tricky one just in terms of like your people skills. Like, how do you not play the victim, still do your job?
Advocate for yourself. Yeah. Because that time, say, lost to going appointments is time gained in having a healthy employee who feels happy and supported at work. If you are feeling good and supported at work, your work is going to be good. Your outputs are going to be good. So what does it matter if you attended lost 3 days to appointments, but you have a happy employee.
It's also if your HbA1c is better, you're probably going to recover more quickly from the flu when you get it once a year.
You're not going to get sick. Yeah.
Exactly. So it is in their interest to some degree. What do you think the ideal workplace would look like for you as a diabetic?
An ideal workplace. Okay, I'm thinking more like corporate job, but it would be no fluorescent lights, stand-up desks where you can stand, an environment where maybe the gym is attached or close to work, so you can maybe, go on your lunch break and go and do a little bit of exercise. Maybe a office culture that is a lot more healthy or active, or not bringing like a whole lot of like donuts into the office as treats, more like fruit, and it sounds kind of a little bit like cheesy, but having that environment that is a little bit more active, even though it's a desk job, that it would still promote some kind of movement, go for a coffee walk instead of, just sort of sitting and snacking at your desk. That workplace would be ideal. And then if we look at a management, sort of just having flexibility that 1 or 2 days I could work at home, or I can take that sick day or that appointment day, that there is just a little bit of elbow room in the workplace. You just want to arrive at work and feel like you're in this really supportive environment that is supportive of your mental health and physical health. I think that rings true for even a non-diabetic.
I think that's true. And I think also there's something about being seen as a fully fledged human being by your colleagues. It doesn't mean they need to know everything about you, but that you're like respected as a working person, and diabetes is part of that. It's not the main thing. It's not defining you, but they are comfortable with you whipping out a pen and injecting while you're talking to them in a meeting, and they don't flinch because they've seen it every day. And they're still interested in what you're saying, and that's not a big deal.
Absolutely.
One thing that people worry about, I think, is when to tell their employer that they're diabetic, or how many people at work to tell.
Do you have to tell them?
Yeah. I have erred for most of my life on the side of privacy and been private about my diabetes. I didn't have teachers involved in my care when I was a child. They knew I was diabetic, but it wasn't something where my teachers knew much about it. I have always wanted to be self-sufficient and private, but I also have never hid it. So I've always injected in public and so on. It's a bit difficult when you go into the world of work because you always sort of feel like you're performing a little bit, I think, as an employed person, You're slightly being assessed. Depends on how long you've been in the role and everything. And particularly when you're applying for a job, you're absolutely being assessed. Have you always told your employers? Do you tell them at the interview stage? How do you go about it?
There's never been a formal moment that I've shared it. I've never disclosed in an interview at all, because as much as I don't believe you shouldn't be discriminated against, but who knows? I don't know what prejudices the person might have. So I'd rather just not disclose it, because I know that I'm capable to do my job. So it would be quite organic. Say, I'd do an injection and someone would be like, "Oh, what's that?" I'm like, "Oh no, and I say it as nonchalantly as, I had oats for breakfast. "Oh yeah, no, I'm a type 1 diabetic." And then, "Oh, wait, no." So I take injections, and then slowly it kind of spreads through the office, or the next person a week later will see me do an injection. And then you'll have one person who's super inquisitive, and then more people join in on the conversation. But it's never been this like announcement. And I think when you find, say, friends at work, or someone who you are like a little bit closer to, or you just enjoy or trust them, then I would say, like, "Listen, if ever I'm looking like sweating and confused in a meeting, please like chuck me a packet of sugar. Like, I'll need help." And I had one colleague at my previous job, like she knew my alarms on my phone, and she had my back no matter what. And I didn't need the whole office to do that, but having her sort of be in my corner, but she kept it so light, like she'd hear it and she'd be like, "Tracy, like, girl, get your sugar. How are you doing?" Or, if it wasn't a meeting, she would like, you give me like some eyebrows, and like, I knew like she has my back. That is great because like the pros of disclosure is that if I am in an emergency, I've got someone who actually knows what's going on with me and that they can support me and get me out of trouble. Because yeah, you could have other colleagues who would just like say, look at me and be like, oh, wow, is she drunk at work? The way she's behaving. Meanwhile, like I'm just severely low and no one really knows how to help me. So I thought that is important that someone who's around quite a bit does know the dangers of being a diabetic so that they can help me in an emergency situation.
Yeah, it's funny hearing you describe that process of like one person sees and asks and then other people join in and chat and other people, it's such a weird, I was like, I just realized I've never spoken to anyone else before about that process and the feeling of that process. And it's quite like specific diabetic experience that it was quite weird hearing you talk about it. I was like, yeah, it's exactly like that. And you kind of know what questions are going to come. It can be a bit tedious. It's a bit like, oh no, now we're talking about my health. And like, I just met you. But it's nice that you're asking
and being inquisitive. And it feels like you fought the cat's out of the bag in a way, because it's not like withholding the secret, but now it just becomes like easy, common knowledge. And then there's kind of less hiding it, or you're never going to really have to talk too much about it again. Like the conversation is done.
Yeah. So in the job I had where I was a travel agent, it was quite strict in terms of like the CEO was ex-military and he used to have rules. You had, for example, a 25-minute lunch break. And if you went 26 minutes, then your phone would ring and someone would have to pick up and say where you were. So it was like so I did say, once they offered me the role, I did say, I do need to eat lunch, every day. And I mean, no, I don't think anyone ever remembered that. But it is something I said, like, am I going to always be able to go for lunch because the rules were so strict? And, what would happen if I needed to step away from my desk? And I sometimes, someone that was like managing the call center would see that I wasn't answering my phone and ask me what I was doing. And I would say, I just need 2 minutes. My blood sugar's low or something. So I had to tell them, or I felt that I needed to. And now I actually mention it in job interviews purely because I use the podcast as like part of my portfolio. And so it's been quite vulnerable. But I'm like, well, I have a podcast for diabetics. And then they're like, oh, you're diabetic. And I'm like, yeah, but don't focus on that part.
The podcast part, that's what you need to focus on. It's amazing.
But in a way, it's nice because now when I start a new job, they'll already know. So it won't be new information. So yeah, you don't have to by law disclose that you are diabetic in an interview unless, I think, we might want to. First of all, you may have to if it's a job that involves something physical or where it could be dangerous. So if you're going to be a pilot or a driver or a firefighter or anything of that nature, then you probably are going to need to go through some kind of a physical, and so you're probably going to need to reveal it. But it's your choice. You don't have to tell work. If you're going to be in a company for a long time, it might be helpful though, because it may help you get some reasonable adjustments that you need. But you don't necessarily have to tell all your colleagues. You could tell one colleague or no one, but I think if you're not telling anyone, if you do need to eat or inject or do something, it's just going to potentially make it a little bit more stressful for you, because you now have to find an excuse while your brain is struggling and your body is struggling. I don't know that that's ideal, but again, it's totally up to you. So while we're talking about laws, just to briefly tell you what your rights are as a diabetic in an employed role. So it's probably a lot more complicated than this. We're not employment lawyers, but the simple concept is in both the UK and in South Africa, you are protected against discrimination if you have a disability. Now, in the UK, diabetes is classified as a disability. In South Africa, it's a bit more complicated than that. You're not qualified as disabled, but there are rules that protect people from being discriminated because they have an illness when they're at work, so long as it's not impacting the work that they're producing. In short, your employer should be reasonable, and they should, give you the basic things that you need in order to do your job, if they can, and it's not impossible for them to do so. So things like having your lunch at the same time every day, if that's very important for your diabetes management and it's not going to be massively disruptive to your job, that might be something that you could ask for. That might be a reasonable request. Or having a place that you can go and be in private to do a site change or take insulin or something like that could be something reasonable that you could ask for. If the company provides food and drink in the office and there's nothing there that you feel is suitable for you, you might be able to say, can I have something different? So those are all like simple, reasonable things. But then there's other situations where it may be perfectly reasonable for them to not make an adjustment. So if the job is shift-based always for everybody, and they tell you that when you apply, and it's the only way that the job can operate, then it's going to be difficult for them to make that adjustment for you. If in some places you can't be a professional driver, if you're diabetic, some places you can do lots of different things, lots of different roles, but under conditions. So for example, you can be a pilot, you can fly for British Airways as a diabetic, but they are going to need to see your medical records. They're going to want to from your doctor. They're going to want to know your HbA1c. They're going to want to know that you have tested your blood a certain amount of times at a certain time during the flight. You're not going to be allowed to fly if your blood sugar is low. If you're frequently in DKA, they're probably not going to let you keep flying. So overall, in general, your boss should be reasonable and give you reasonable adjustments. I guess that's the simple version.
Another reasonable adjustment is even access to your fridge, so you can put your insulin in if you need. We spoke about appointments, like that flexibility. If you are in a job where maybe you can't necessarily eat in the environment that you're working in, how to navigate a protocol with your employees to say, okay, if I'm low, then I need to leave and then take glucose sweets, or how can we make a plan around it if you're working in like a strictly no eating area. Those conversations need to happen, and they, go to someone that you trust. It might be your HR manager, it might be the director, whoever you have a good relationship with in senior management, or even just to start those conversations and see where they can meet you. It also comes down to not only the accommodations they can make, but how they can help you in an emergency situation. As controlled as we are, or our blood sugars can be perfect, we all know diabetes can have its days where we might just be caught completely off guard with a hypo, and then we are suddenly not safe and someone needs to be able to help us. So as much as we're thinking about what other people might think, we also need to think about how I'm going to keep myself safe and keep myself happy at work so that I can enjoy my job and not feel stressed and not feel burdened.
So one of the guys in my local diabetes support WhatsApp group, he was diagnosed diabetic as an adult, and he was at the time working in the army, I think, as an explosives expert. So he's like going into conflict zones and using explosives. And the army is exempt from discrimination laws, so they're allowed to choose not to employ people with diabetes, and they don't generally employ anyone with diabetes. Because he was already working for them, he kind of was steered towards a desk job, from what I can understand, which he didn't want to do. And so I guess, in that situation, that was just the reality. They were allowed to do it, and he was not allowed to continue in the job that he was doing. And it didn't matter how many doctor's letters or perfect HbA1cs or perfect time and ranges he had. It didn't matter that he, was basically bending over backwards and running his blood sugar looked like a non-diabetic person. They still were not going to give him that job. And, maybe you could argue that's discrimination. It's unfair. It's unacceptable. We shouldn't treat diabetics as if they can't do things. On the other hand, maybe you could imagine yourself when your blood sugar is very low in an unfamiliar situation, handling explosives, and you might feel like maybe they could have had a point. I don't know. I don't know enough about the situation. So I think there's sort of a bit of give and take in some of these things in terms of, making a choice that's best for your diabetes and for your career.
Something I also want to talk about is insurance. So income protection, which you can get through insurers in South Africa, that if something happens to me where I am not able to work, that I can be paid my salary even though I'm not working. So when I looked into applying for income protection, now this is when I first started working, so I'll have to revisit to see if anything has changed. But no insurer would cover me at all because I had type 1 diabetes. So during COVID, colleagues that got sick and couldn't go to work, they, were offered 2 weeks and got paid their full salary in those 2 weeks. If I got sick, sorry for me, there's no compensation. Even though arguably I am, say, healthier than another random South African, because I'm in a healthcare system, I'm looking after myself, I'm active, I'm healthy. But because insurers see diabetics as such high risk, there's such a high risk category, like things can go wrong, it could cost them a lot. And this is encompassing type 2 diabetes as well. You could have an amputation and now this insurance company would be stuck paying you your full salary for the next 20 years. With recently breaking my collarbone and I could not work. And that was pretty scary because I thought, this has nothing to do with diabetes and I don't have that insurance to cover my income loss. And I would, keep this open to everyone to investigate it and see where you can get income protection. And because it might not be anything diabetes related, but we rely on our minds and our bodies to provide for us, but we do have a harder time, with all these things we have to look after. And yes, we can have hypos and complications that are maybe unforeseeable, but just to go and investigate how you can protect your income if you were unable to work one day.
Yeah, I don't think it's much different here, but you can get government support here if you have to stop working. Maybe not equal to the value of your income, but at least your healthcare will stay free and you can get some support. The other thing to think about is some people that could be very helpful to you. One is your HR team, if you work in a company with an HR team. If you don't want to be speaking directly to your boss and others about diabetes, they're the people to talk to and they can tell you what you are and are not entitled to and help you manage that. And then also occupational health specialists can be involved. So I have one diabetic friend who had to take some time off work for diabetes, and they sort of realized that she was diabetic and referred her to an occupational health assessment, which came back and was actually relatively useful because it advised them that she was managing her diabetes well. She was doing all the right things. And it told them some of the challenges that you can face as a diabetic and the things you might need. For example, they explained you could come to work very tired if you had been kept awake by hyperglycemia all night, and that you have a bit of mental burden that others don't carry, that she might need access to a fridge, that she might be allowed to have a walk after her lunch, that she might be allowed to eat at her desk if she's not normally. So this came from a doctor. And I think on the other hand, there is a risk that kind of assessment could be used to tell your company that you're not managing it well, that you're not doing everything that you're supposed to do, and that you are a risk to them in some way, or that they can't rely on you. So I think it depends what you tell the assessor and what your situation is. But that person can also be useful if you're trying to have some kind of adjustment made. So another person on my one of my WhatsApp groups, diabetes WhatsApp groups, said that she had been struggling with her shift patterns because her her pump was getting confused. She's on a hybrid closed loop pump, and it was learning her pattern, and then 1 in every 7 shifts was at a different time or something like that. And so the pump then didn't know what to do on those days because it didn't understand her patterns. Her pattern was broken, rather. And so she went through a process where the company did an occupational health assessment, and they concluded that, yes, it was a reasonable adjustment and she did deserve to have that shift changed. And they adjusted her shifts. And as a result, she is now in a much better place with her diabetes. And so these people, these sort of in-between people, can join the dots and help everybody understand what needs to happen.
Speak the same language. But I really like that story because I feel like these adjustments, they're not massive asks, I guess, depending on the job, but they can so easily be accommodated. And when you do understand, maybe what a diabetic has to go through or experience, it can just make it so much easier. Like, I'd love if I showed up at work exhausted after a bad night, that I could say to someone like, I just had lows last really bad night. And they'd be like, oh, yes, of course, the occupational health practitioner did mention this. Okay, what do you need? And just understanding where you don't feel like you always have to explain yourself or explain things away or just like push things aside and try show up as best as possible, but you're really running on a deficit.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a bit about some survival tips for work. If you're diabetic, things you can do to make life a little bit easier. The first one I think about is planning your day if you can. So even if every day looks a little bit different, if you can look at your meeting schedule, if you can look at, when different things are happening and figure out, okay, that's a good time for me to eat, or that's a very long stretch where I won't be able to do a finger prick or look at my phone. So before that, I better have a quick look at my blood sugar, or let me make sure I take some snacks into that meeting room because I'm going to get very hungry by then, and all they're going to bring is donuts or whatever. So just look at your day and sort of try to anticipate problems and solve them before they happen if you can. Learn about stress management is another one I would say. We can't avoid stress. Stress is not necessarily bad for us. Stress is a normal part of the human experience. But if you don't cope with it well, it's probably going to make your life more unpleasant and possibly impact your diabetes more. So, that can be things like making sure you are a little bit active every day, making sure you have some decompression time at the end of the workday before you go home and make dinner and interact with your family. There's lots of different ways to cope with stress: mindfulness, meditation, counseling, all sorts of different things. And some of them are very simple. And yeah, if you've never looked into that, I highly recommend it.
My recommendation is to build yourself a little diabetes work kit, like a little box or like a little bag it's your work diabetes bag, where you've got glucose sweets, juice box, your spare infusion set, spare CGM, maybe a bit of extra insulin, or pop that in the fridge, a battery, a charger, a ketone strip, just so when things go wrong at work, you have the full backup and you don't really have to think hard. You just grab your little bag and you're good to go. You can problem solve with that. Something that I wish I did more of as well is also just treat hypos early. When it starts, ticking in, treat it. Don't wait. What I found is I would be in the middle of a conversation and be like, I can't leave this conversation because it's my boss, or I can't, I'm sure he'll stop talking now. And then next thing I'm completely zonked and out of it and then I've trashed the next 6 hours, the rest of my day. I'm just I'm so exhausted, recovering from that low. So don't finish that email, treat the low, have a minute, then go finish that email. Use your technology. If you have CGM and you set a nice alarm that's a little bit earlier, maybe when your sugar is 4.6, so you can skip that whole going terribly low bit, just to keep you in a little tighter range. Yeah, and if you can just have a smart approach for everything, like down to your meeting, sit near the exit. There were many times where I would quickly make a cup of tea before the meeting, but I would put like 5 teaspoons of sugar in there. And I'm like, no one knows. I'm just drinking tea. Meanwhile, I'm drinking syrup because I'm about to go low. And it's like no one would guess, like suspect anything. So that was often my strategy, was like a super sweet tea into a long meeting if I knew I was double arrows down. And then, even just like pretending you need to step out on the phone because you're going low and you're just like, oh, so someone's calling. And then you quickly skip out the meeting and pretend to answer. Meanwhile, you just need to go help yourself. Like, be creative, make it work for you.
Yeah, those are really good. I think having the sneaky hypo treatments, I've also had, when I've been recording other podcasts, I'll have a water and I'll have a juice. And then just depending on how I see things happening, I just pick which one I'm drinking. And yeah, again, nobody notices.
You're either trying to bring a high down and hydrating, or you're just trying to bring your sugars up.
Exactly. One thing I have found, and a couple of people have mentioned it, is that they struggle with high blood sugars during work hours because of stress and because of being sedentary. And I have actually started taking 2 units of insulin at 3 p.m. on a weekday, purely because I tend not to get up between 1 o'clock and 5 or 6. I tend to work, that tends to be like a big focus block. And by 4 o'clock, my blood sugar is always like 12. And then it keeps going up. If I take my little 2 units at 3 p.m., I'm not eating anything. I'm not consuming any carbs. I'm not doing anything. I'm just sitting still. I find that just helps because I'm on pens. Presumably, if I was on a pump, I would increase my basal rate during that period. But yeah, and I don't do it on the weekends, and it works quite nicely. So yeah, so another person said that they adjusted their basal on weekdays, and that was for stress. So yeah, check with your doctor if you're unsure, but there are things you can do to accommodate for stress and for being sedentary. Obviously, getting up and walking around is better than taking 2 units of insulin, but you know what? You got to do what you got to do. Well, we would love to hear all about your diabetes in the workplace experiences. So please do send us a message on Instagram, maybe even a little screenshot of your diabetes setup at work or your diabetes kit. I would love to know how you guys cope in your various roles. And also, just to let you know that we are going to take a break for the month of July. Tracy is going somewhere exciting. Where are you going, Tracy?
Norway and the UK. So I'll also be seeing Kate, which is quite exciting. So I'll be away for a full month. And where are you going, Kate?
Well, before I meet up with you, which I'm very excited about, I am going to a wedding in Bali. So we'll be on different continents. Nice. But yes, please don't forget about us. Don't start listening to some other boring podcast while we're off. Well, you can, but just stop at the end of July because we will be back in August. And I'm sure I have plenty to yak about. So like and subscribe on the YouTube channel.
Find us on Instagram. We are at Correction Dose.
We'll see you in August.
Okay, bye.
Goodbye.